Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Edward Little Library Read Aloud of Nightbooks by J.A. White, read with permission from HarperCollins Publishers. So, we're reading every Monday through Friday at 3 o'clock. The link is posted on Instagram and Facebook for the YouTube channel where we read. So, you can catch up on any missed chapters there. Before we move on, we need to recap what happened yesterday in chapter 11, which was a crazy chapter. So, Alex and Yasmin are completely in the dark in the witch's nursery. The shredder, if you remember, has cut free all of the sacks underneath the vine, the sick vine, and all the creepy insects, are loose. The two decide to stay together and make their way back in the dark toward the apartment door. Alex kicks something on the way and he stops. He realizes it's Lenore and she's wounded. And he picks her up despite Yasmin's kind of like, hey, she gets what she deserves kind of attitude. And he begins to carry her. As they continue in the dark towards the apartment, it suddenly gets very, very quiet. So they think like they're out of the woods. They think everything is cool. They must, not be chasing them anymore. And those things have been trapped in the nursery. However, and actually Yasmin says, boy, if they had gotten into Natasha's apartment, they would really be in big trouble. Well, that's when Alex realizes what he's done. He left the apartment door open, if you remember, just a tiniest bit, just to let a little light in because it was so dark in the witch's nursery when he first went in. Yasmin immediately cranks it. She breaks into a run. When they reach the apartment, though, what happens? It's too late. The apartment is infested with all of these danglers that are now insects and rodents and roaches. So they agree to work together, trying to kill them. Yasmin, is swatting and Alex is stomping, but quickly, and even Lenore helps, but quickly they realize they're outnumbered. And actually their prey starts to fight back because they start crawling up their back and on their ankles and whatnot. That's when Natasha returns, and she is mad, but she uses her magic to clear each room and exterminate the intruders. Yasmin, after all that's done, tries to explain, but Natasha's already preparing a spell, a powerful, dangerous spell to cast on her. That's when Alex makes the decision to stand in front of her and say, wait, I caused all of this mess. Because he thinks that Natasha wouldn't hurt her because he's the storyteller that she needs. But he's wrong because Natasha has gone a little bit crazy. So she prepares to cast this spell now on Alex and Yasmin. Suddenly, though, the apartment begins to quake, and this distraction causes Natasha to kind of lose hold on the spell. And that ends. So she doesn't do anything to harm either of the two kids. That night, Alex, he's too tired. Right before that, Natasha is tired because of all of this. So she goes into her room and she uses the bone key to get into her secret room. And usually she looks over her shoulder to see who's looking because she doesn't want anybody to see in there. But tonight she's just too tired. When she does that, Alex can see beyond her into the threshold, and what he sees is like green grass, sky, an exit. So he's wound up now. He has to figure out, he knows he needs to get that bone key, but he needs to figure out how he can get it from Natasha. So he goes to bed knowing that he's probably not going to be able to sleep. And suddenly he hears this kind of crunching or just this kind of noise. So he gets up to investigate. He sounds like it's coming from his closet. So he goes and opens the closet door, and the closet looks pretty much like normal. He picks up his backpack thinking something has probably, something's behind it or whatever. And he thinks like it's maybe one of the insects that Natasha just didn't kill when she exterminated all the others. However, there's a hole in his backpack, and the shredder kind of comes out. And remember what the shredder does. The shredder shreds. And so he picks up his backpack, and all kinds of torn paper falls out of the hole that is made. He quickly opens the backpack and realizes that all of his stories because all the paper spills from his backpack and lands in front of him when he dumps it out. And his stories, all of them from his Nightbooks, have been destroyed. So, that's a bummer. So that's where we left off on that chapter, chapter 11. So today, excuse me, we're going to start with chapter 12, which is Yasmin's story. After discovering the fate of his Nightbooks, Alex was too upset to sleep. He couldn't stop thinking about the hours spent writing each story, the shock of discovery when a new character stepped out of the shadows, the frustration when a plot withered and died, the sheer bliss of unearthing a perfect word. The writing had been agonizing at times, but it had also been wonderful. And now I have nothing to show for it, he thought. More than anything else, Alex regretted not sharing the stories when he had a chance. He pictured a graveyard with the words, "They died unread," etched into each tombstone, and felt a mixture of guilt and loss. Unfortunately, resurrecting the stories wasn't a possibility. Alex might remember some of the plots and characters, but piecing them back together again would be like reassembling a cracked eggshell. No matter how hard he tried, the stories would never be the same. There was no time to grieve for what he had lost, however. Without those two Nightbooks, Alex no longer had a stockpile of stories from which to draw. His situation had become more perilous than ever. How many stories do I have left? How many days before Natasha no longer has any use for me? Alex needed to know. He sprinted to the library, suddenly convinced that the final Nightbook had also been torn to bits, and sighed with relief when he found it safe and sound on the desk. Alex carefully flipped through its pages, taking stock of the stories that he hadn't yet read to Natasha. He found one that would work, and then a second that he had abandoned midway, thinking it a lost cause. Alex read it again. Sometimes he would revisit a draft after a week or two and find that it was a lot better than he thought. Unfortunately, this particular story had not improved. In fact, it was even worse than he remembered. He continued flipping. There were 2 more stinkers, and then another story near the back of the book that wasn't half bad. 2 stories. That was all he had left. "Okay," Alex said, pacing back and forth. "No big deal. I just have to start writing again. Plenty of time." Alex sat in front of the open notebook and smoothed down a fresh page. Despite his lack of sleep, he felt energized. He hadn't written anything in over a week, and he was excited to make up for lost time. This is going to be fun, Alex thought. He picked up a pencil and started to jot down some ideas. 3 hours later, Alex was sitting in the exact same position. The gears of his mind, which normally spun like a well-oiled engine, felt clogged with molasses. He couldn't come up with a single good idea. The harder he tried, the more difficult it became. He remembered another term that Ms. Corral had written on the board: writer's block. Alex hadn't liked that one nearly as much as interior logic. At last someone knocked on the door. Alex leaped out of his seat to answer it. "Good morning," Yasmin said. She looked different. For one thing, she wasn't wearing her Met's cap. Her long hair, still wet from a recent shower, fell straight down her back. Gone, too, were the work clothes she normally wore, replaced by jeans and a faded gray t-shirt, a size too big for her. The difference in Yasmin was more than just her physical appearance, however. She stood straight and proud, with a relaxed confidence that Alex had never seen before. He felt like he was meeting the real girl for the first time. "Hey," Alex said. "Hey," replied Yasmin. There was a stone mortar filled with gray paste in her hands. She held it out now like a new neighbor delivering a pie. "I made a poultice from some plants in the nursery. I figure you have a ton of bites and scratches from yesterday. This will help with the pain." "Thanks," Alex said, taking it. "That was really nice of you." "If you hadn't taken the blame for what happened yesterday, I wouldn't be standing here right now. It seemed the least I could do." "It was no big deal," Alex said, fighting a blush and losing. "Any idea what kind of spell she was going to cast on us?" Yasmin nodded. "We'll get to that," she said. "Can you take a break for a few minutes? I know you have a lot of questions, and I figure it's time someone told you a story for a change." She nodded toward a nasty gash on his hand. "But get some poultice on that first. It looks pretty bad." Alex did as she suggested. The pain instantly started to fade. "Wow," he said, already smearing a substantial amount across a second wound on his forearm. "How do you learn to make this stuff? I thought Natasha only sold oils." "This isn't for sale," Yasmin said. "It's for her prisoners. In case someone gets hurt, she wants them up and about as quickly as possible. There are oils to be made, you know, or, in your case, stories to be written." She took a deep, lingering breath, like a student before a final exam. "You want to sit down before I start? This could take a while." "Hold on," he said. "I'm dying to hear your whole story. I really am. But first," he raised the mortar, "there's someone who needs your poultice a lot more than I do." They found Lenore curled up in the corner of the kitchen. Her orange and black fur was spotted with blood, but at least her tail looked better. The stone that previously encased it had shattered, littering the floor with pebbles. Alex knelt down beside her. "Hey, Lenore," he said softly. "I have medicine. It will make you feel better." The cat managed to raise her head a few inches off the floor and hiss. It was as fearsome as air leaking from a bicycle tire. "At least we don't have to worry about getting scratched," Yasmin said, with reluctant sympathy. "The poor thing can barely move." Alex dabbed a bit of poultice on 2 fingers and lowered it toward a bite mark on Lenore's stomach. The cat vanished. "I can't help if I can't see you," Alex said in her parental tone. When Lenore didn't reappear, he added, "Have it your way," and smeared the poultice in the general vicinity of the bite. At first the cat squirmed feebly, trying to avoid his touch. After just a few seconds, however— hold on, I gotta get the light back on. Hold on. Okay, had to turn the light back on. Sorry, they're on an automatic timer. Okay, let's see. Not an automatic timer, a motion sensor. So at first, the cat squirmed feebly, trying to avoid his touch. After just a few seconds, however, she grew suddenly still. "See," Alex said, "it feels better, doesn't it? Now stop being so stubborn and let me do this the right way." Lenore turned barely visible, like a light at its dimmest setting. "Fine," her expression seemed to say, "but this is all you get." Alex gently spread the poultice over the cat's wounds. Lenore stiffened when he touched some of the nastier spots, but for the most part, bore his ministrations without complaint. "Can you do that and listen to me at the same time?" Yasmin asked. "I've been holding everything inside for so long, and now I feel like I'm going to explode if I wait any longer." Alex nodded in understanding. He had often felt the same way when starting to write a story. "Maybe we should talk somewhere else," he suggested, looking meaningfully at Lenore. He lowered his voice to a whisper. "She might be out of it, but she's still listening. Anything you say—" "This is all stuff that Natasha knows already. Anyway," Yasmin said, "nothing that will get us in trouble." "Okay." Yasmin started to take a seat, then changed her mind and paced back and forth across the kitchen floor. As she walked, she tucked her hands beneath her chin and wrung them together. "My first night in the apartment, I cried my eyes out," Yasmin said. "I had no idea what was happening. All I knew was that some woman had tricked me into coming inside, and now I was trapped. It wasn't until the next morning that I learned I wasn't alone. There were 3 others: Eli, little Juan, and Claire. She smiled sadly, remembering. They taught me what I needed to know. Eli was in charge of the cooking. Juan did the cleaning. I learned how to tend to the plants in the nursery from Claire. She was a year older than me, with this big smile that could light up an entire room. She had been Natasha's prisoner the longest, but she hadn't lost her optimistic attitude. She kept saying that if we stuck together, everything would be all right. Except they're gone now, Alex thought, so everything didn't turn out all right. He sat perfectly still, no longer tending to Lenore, just listening. Part of him was riveted, but another part wanted to cover his ears before Yasmin's tale took its inevitable turn into darkness. For the first time in his life, Alex understood why some people stopped reading a scary story in the middle. At night, we took turns reading to Natasha from one of the books in the library. All of us except Juan, that is. He didn't really know how to read yet. After Natasha had gone to sleep, we huddled together in Claire's room and tried to come up with an escape plan. Eli, who was kind of a hothead, insisted that if we all charged Natasha at once, we could tie her up and then she'd have to let us go. Claire disagreed. She didn't think we stood a chance against Natasha's magic. She said that we just had to be patient and wait for our opportunity. It would come. Juan didn't say anything at all. Mostly, he just clung to Claire. Sometimes he cried, and she rocked him to sleep like a baby. "How about you?" Alex asked. "I was Team Claire all the way," Yasmin said, "in everything. We only knew each other for a few weeks, but it didn't matter. Living through such a horrible experience pushes you together a lot faster than regular life. She became my sister. Juan and Eli were my brothers. I'm not saying I was happy. None of us were happy, but at least we had each other." Silence settled. Alex realized that Yasmin had reached the most difficult part of the story. She wouldn't continue unless he nudged her forward, like a reader turning a page. "Tell me what happened," he said. She looked up. Her eyes were wet with memory. "I don't have to tell you," she said. "I can show you." Alex left a handful of Fruit Loops by Lenore's side and followed Yasmin into the dining room. She stopped in front of the antique china cabinet and studied the porcelain children lining the shelves. Alex followed her gaze. Until this point, he hadn't paid much attention to the figurines, but now he noticed that there was something off about their gleeful expressions. The smiles looked forced, he thought, like when a photographer takes too long to snap a picture, and you have to keep smiling whether you like it or... Alex shivered as the truth hit him. "These are the kids who lived here before us," he said, wondering why he hadn't figured it out earlier. "Natasha turned them into little statues." Yasmin nodded. "That's Juan," she said, pointing to a figure of a small Asian boy sitting in a rocking chair. He was holding a stuffed rabbit. In the end, he couldn't keep up with the work like the rest of us. Natasha finally lost her patience. And there, Eli. Yasmin pressed her finger against the glass, inches from a rangy boy with a mop of blonde hair. He was smiling like all the others. Alex supposed that was a creepy side effect of the spell, but his eyes were shut tight in one final act of defiance. He went ahead with his plan and tried to jump Natasha when she least expected it, Yasmin said. It didn't work. She knelt down, her eyes level with the bottom shelf of the china cabinet now. Alex identified Claire before Yasmin even pointed to her, a pretty girl drawing water from a well, with eyes that radiated kindness. She looked like someone who would grow up to be a teacher or a nurse. In the end, it was just the two of us, Yasmin said, me and Claire. Until one day there was a knock at the door. That happens sometimes. We get visitors. grocery delivery, landlord, neighbors, even the police from time to time. Not since I've been here, Alex said. I'm sure people have come, Yasmin explained. Only, when Natasha's not in the apartment, we can't even hear the knocking, and they can't hear us either. It's like a wall between us and the outside world. But that changes when Natasha's home. Occasionally, she has to let people inside. If not, someone might grow suspicious. Alex wondered if his family had ever knocked on the door to apartment 4E. Maybe he had been standing on the other side of the wall at the time, just a few feet away. That day was different than usual, Yasmin continued, because we were actually expecting a visitor. The pipes in the kitchen sink had been leaking for a week, and there wasn't anything that Natasha's magic could do to fix it, which was a little bit funny, so she had to finally call the plumber. Claire and I did as we were told and stayed in the nursery. We could scream and shout all we wanted to down there, but no one would hear a thing in the apartment. While we waited in the dark, Claire took my hands and told me the truth. She had broken the kitchen pipes herself, knowing that a plumber would have to come. There was a note taped to the underside of the sink explaining everything. It begged whoever found it to send help as quickly as possible. That was a good idea, Alex said. It was, replied Yasmin, only Natasha figured it out somehow, and when she unlocked the door to the nursery, the note was in her hands. Yasmin cleared her throat. Claire didn't even try to talk her way out of it. She spent her last minutes making sure Natasha knew that I hadn't been involved. Yasmin looked drained, like someone recovering from a long illness, but not nearly as sad anymore. By sharing her story, she had shed a portion of her grief. So now you know, Yasmin said. That's why I was so mean to you in the beginning. I didn't want to risk getting close to someone else and losing them again. I'm sorry. She hugged him, and Alex hugged her back. It should have been weird and awkward. She was a girl, after all. But it wasn't that way at all. It felt right. They were still trapped, but they were no longer alone. Can the spell on your friends be reversed? Alex asked when they had parted. You know, like in a fairy tale, when the witch dies and everything goes back to the way it was in the end. This isn't a story, Alex. Claire had it right the first time. All we can really do is be patient and hope something changes. She peeked into the kitchen to make sure Lenore hadn't moved. I agree with you about the blue mist, she whispered. I think it's what keeps the witch young. For all we know, Natasha could be hundreds of years old, maybe thousands. We're just kids. How can we hope to outsmart her? Alex stared at the figurines through his ghostly reflection in the glass. He remembered what Natasha had said his second day in the apartment, when she was on the verge of casting the spell that would have added him to her collection. Just be a doll and stand still, and whatever you do, don't close your eyes, like a photograph. It gave him an idea. Are those the same outfits that your friends were wearing when the spells were cast on them? He asked. Why? Just go with it. Yeah, Yasmin said. Those hideous smiles are fake, and I doubt that Claire ever got water from a well in her life, but everything else is right on target. Look, you can even see little Juan's little watch. He always wore that thing. Good, Alex said, scanning the figurines more carefully now. That means it should definitely be there. What? Yasmin asked. I'll tell you in a second. He traced his finger along the glass, trying not to rush. If I'm right, he thought, this changes everything. He searched the figurines once, and then a second time, just to make sure. There was no question about it. No one was wearing a unicorn pendant. She promised that she would never take it off, Alex thought with rising excitement. That means she isn't there. Natasha never turned her into a figurine. There's a way out of this place, he said. "I don't know how yet, but I'm positive it can be done." "What makes you so sure?" Alex smiled. "Because I know someone who escaped," he said. Ooh. And that is the end of chapter 12 for today. Thank you so much for listening in. We will be right back here tomorrow afternoon at 3 o'clock, so I hope you can listen in again tomorrow. We'll continue on with our story. It's getting interesting, so stay tuned for tomorrow, chapter 13. And thanks for joining us today. Have a great day, everyone.